Welcome to this tutorial request where we will be creating a game over screen and also a death counter. So let's jump into it. Before we continue with the video, if you like what I'm doing here on this channel, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel a lot. Anyway, let's get back to the video. So this is what we will be creating today. We have this character, and when it falls off this platform, it will die. And when it dies, we get a game over screen, which tells us how many times we have died, and we have the ability to either quit or to retry. So if we click retry, the character will respawn, and we can continue on and die again if we want to, and the death counter goes up. Or we can press quit and the game is over. And that is all. Here we are inside of Unreal Engine 4.26, and this is a continuation from my tutorial request on the checkpoint and respawn system. It sort of makes sense to continue from that since we are already having like the repeated deaths in place, so we can now hook in a game over screen and have a death count connected to that. So I will leave a link to that tutorial in the description down below. Anyway, to continue with this tutorial, what we want to create first is a game over screen. So let's do that. So we'll right click, go to user interface. We'll choose a widget blueprint. We'll call it W_game over. And then open it up. We'll have something very simple here. We'll have some text. We can type in game over. We can make sure that the position, first of all, we want to anchor it somewhere. In this case, we can anchor it in the middle. After that, we can reset the position in X. We change the alignment in X to 0.5, so it's centered perfectly. And after that, I think we're done, unless you want to have something like larger font or something like that. Let's change the font from size 24 to 48 maybe. And click in the size to content. And in addition to that, maybe we want a different color, or we could add some shadows to it possibly. So shadow offset, shadow color. Let's try 5 and 5. And it's transparent to begin with, so let's find something that has alpha 1. Now we see we have the shadows here appearing. Maybe 5.5 is a bit much, maybe try 3.3. Just something so the text has something to project over. And that could be all we need for that. In addition to that, we also want to have some functionality for like retrying or quitting out. So we can add 2 buttons. Add one over here, add one over there. And in addition to that, we want some text in them, so we'll drag off text to each of them. Now we can click the first button and we can say that this is our retry button. So in the text, we can say that we want to have the text retry. We can make the text color. Oh, am I changing? I'm on the shadow still. That's not what I wanted. I wanted to change the color and opacity. Let's make it black. Just so it's easily visible on the button. And then we'll click the retry button and size the content. And we'll make sure to anchor it in the middle. We'll reset the X position. We'll align it 0.5 in X. That should be okay. And then we go to the next button and we can say that this is the quit button. We'll size the content, we'll anchor it in the middle, we'll reset X, we'll set the alignment of X to 0.5, and we'll change the text to be, first of all, black, and second of all, to say quit. And there we have our game over screen, essentially. Now we just need to program some logic here. So going to the graph, we have 2 buttons that we want to hook on some behavior to. So go to the quit button here, we can have onClicked, and the retry button onClicked. We will get back to the logic of these buttons in a little bit. For now we can just compile and save and go back out here. Now we want to actually add this widget to our screen at some point when we lose. However, since our character is going to be dying and respawning and over again, we will not be placing the widget in our pawn. We will instead be putting it directly in our player controller. So to do this, we will add a new class and we will type in player controller. We'll add the player controller as the parent, or create it as the parent. We call it BP_player controller. Going to our world settings, we want to make sure that we're using this controller now, so we choose BP player controller over there. Opening up BP controller, we want to have a few things. We want to have something like a custom event, show game over screen. And then we can create widget, call the game over one, add it to viewport. So when this function is called, we're going to create the widget, we're going to add it to the viewport. So now the question becomes, when is this going to get called? Well, since we are currently already have functionality for when our character dies, we could actually hook on that as well here in the player controller. So we could do the following. When we will be losing our pawn at regular intervals, and we will be creating a new pawn to possess. What we can do is we can call on the event onPossess. This is the event that's being called whenever we possess a pawn. So here we get the pawn that we are actually going to possess. Since it has a onDestroy event dispatcher, we can hook onto that and say that we want to listen to it. And when it gets destroyed, we can say we want to do this, for example. However, we need to have some other logic run as well. So to make some accommodations for that, we will be making another event as a temporary in between here. And this will make more sense later on. So we'll drag off from the event here. We click on event, add custom event. We'll call this on pawn death. So this is what happens when the pawn has died. Now, one of the things we know that we want to do is show our game over screen. So we can for now do just that, call the show game over screen. And then that part is done. However, we know that from the previous tutorial, if you're following along from that, that we created a game mode that's handling how our death is currently working. So if we go to our game mode, you can see here that we are hooking on the destroyed, and if that happens, we say that the pawn died and we immediately restart the player. We don't really want to do this anymore in the same manner anyway. So what we will do is we will create a new function or event, custom event. We can call this request respawn. And yeah, that should be fine, I think. So essentially what we want to do now here is say pawn died. We won't be needing this event up here. We no longer need, because we were restarting before and then we were binding on destroyed, but on destroyed is no longer being handled by the game mode to do something. So we can actually just remove this completely and then have it so that when we get a request spawn from the player, we call pawn died, it will call this, which will restart the player. And we don't need to have this reference anymore either, because it's not necessary anymore for this how the functionality is working now. So we want to request a spawn now from the player. So the player will say when it has died, it should request to be respawned. However, the game mode exists only on the server, and the widget only exists on the client. So we need to work as a mediator between them, meaning that our widget will be communicating with our player controller, and our controller will be contacting the server game mode, essentially. So what we can do here is we can make a custom event in the player controller and say request respawn, and we'll get the game mode. And let's make this cleaner. So we'll go and create the blueprint interface, BPI underscore request spawn. What we can do now is we can create a function in here and then stagger this functionality. So we can say request spawn. Don't even need to have any inputs at all. And now we can go to our play controller. We can say implement this interface. Not update spawn location, that's the wrong one. We want to have the request spawn. We remove these functions and instead we implement the interface over here. Now we can go to our game mode and we can add the interface here as well. Request spawn. And we can implement it here as well. And we'll actually replace this other event we had and do this. Then we have a player controller, we get our game mode, send a message for request spawn, like so. Then we go to our widgets, and when we press retry, we get controller right, we need to get is it owning controller, owning player, not set. Owning player controller. That's the camera manager. That's the wrong one. Get owning player, of course. This one. So now we have a controller here, and we can again send the message for request spawn. So what's going to happen now is when we press the retry button, we send a message to our player controller that we want to request a spawn. Player controller is implementing that method and sending to the game mode to request a spawn. The game mode itself is then saying the pawn has died, which causes us to restart the player. And that should handle that. However, when we request a spawn, we also want to remove our widget over here. The widget we have for the game over screen, essentially. This is easy enough to do. We can just drag out here and type in remove all widgets. So this will remove all the widgets we have, which is our game over screen. And yeah, let's try that out and see if that works. So we start off, we run off, we die, we get a game over screen, We press retry. Right, we haven't set our settings to be proper. So let's make sure that we have that. When we add to viewport, we want to set our input mode to be UI only. And show mouse cursor, just in case we are not. And when we have removed our widgets, we want to set input mode to be game only. And we can set the show mouse cursor to be not shown. Let's try that again. There we go. We run off, we die, we get our game over screen, we click retry, and we get restarted again. So that works okay. And we apparently have not set our properties correctly somewhere. And over there. There we go. That should fix that. It lacked the player controller, it said. So let's build upon this the death counter then. So we want to keep track of how many times we have died. So we'll add a variable. We'll call it number of deaths. We'll make it an integer because it will only be a whole value. And we'll make it so that upon death, we will set this number and increasing it by 1. Now, we can just do this and remove that. This will increment it and set it at the same time. It's just a macro. If we double click in on it, you can see that it just goes in and adds 1 to the value of the reference of the integer that's being thrown in. So that's what's happening there. And yeah, since this has a default value of 0, that means it will start at 0, and every time the pawn dies, we will increment 1. Now we need to display this somewhere. So what we can do is we can go to our game over screen. We can add another bit of text. We can put it, let's say we put it in the middle as well, just so it's clear to see. We'll anchor it in the middle as well. Reselect X. Align X by 0.5. And we'll type in death count colon and size the content, and after that we can put in another text. We can say that this is our death count and make a variable of it, and we can set it to 6 to see what it looks like. So that's what it will be looking like. It isn't the prettiest, but it will serve its purpose. Going to graph, we can then say that we create a function called set death counter. We're getting ahead of myself. Add custom event, set death counter, and we'll take input of an integer. Call it the new death count. So compile, save. In fact, changing my mind here a little bit, because we are creating the widget immediately, we don't really need to do this. What we can do instead can be a little bit cleaner. We can make it so that we create a variable here, which we call death count. We cannot call it death count apparently because we have the we'll call it death count int just to distinguish the name. Make it an integer, and we'll make it instance editable and expose and spawn. Now that means that we will have it available to us when we start when the widget is created, which means that we can remove tick, remove the pre-construct, but the construct we can go and take our death count and set text, and we can say that the text we want to set is our death count integer. Now this will work because it will always be set whenever this widget is being created, which I will show in a moment here. So compile and save. So now when we go back to our player controller, which is creating the game over widget, we can see that we now have a death count integer there. So now we can take our number of deaths, send it in there, and it should have it when it's created. So if we go in now and run, we fall off the world, we die, our death count is apparently 0 or nothing. So it seems like we have a slight bug. Yeah, it's not updating properly. So let's see what that's all about. The important parts to check here would probably be over here, where we're checking pawn death and also where we're creating the widget. So let's try with this set. We jump off. Number of deaths is currently 0. We skip ahead and it's now 1. So that's everything as we expected. Resume. We're sending 1 into the integer of the widget. Let's resume and go back to here on the construct, set text. Just making sure that it is being set all the way through. We jump off. And we know that this one is 0 and turning into 1, so we can resume. It is now currently 1, we resume, we're in the widget. We're getting in the value of 1 properly in here, and we're setting the death count to be 1. So let's see if I have made some error here. This one is supposed to be called the death count, which it's a variable. Everything looks fine. Everything seems fine so far here. Okay, so we don't have an anchor, which means that, well, we do have an anchor, it's over here, which means that it has a relative position to this anchor, which means that when we start on the screen, which is much smaller than the resolution of this screen, because it's 1280 by 720 and the viewport that we test is in smaller, it's going to be approximately this big, let's say. Which means that all of these that I have already set an anchor for in the middle will realign and put themselves in the middle of the screen. But this one just has an offset. So if we just choose to have an anchor in the middle for this, then it should be working, I think. I'm so confident that I will remove the breakpoints even. Yes, death count 1. Then we choose retry, and we die again, and we have death count 2. Now we just need to add some logic for the quit button, and we should be done. This should be easy enough if we go to the widgets and the quit buttons press, and we type in quit. We have something called quit game. And I do believe this wants a player controller. Get the owning player controller. And we want to quit, and everything else is fine. So let's play the game, and we jump off, and we press quit, and it's done. So that's it. I hope everything made sense and you were able to follow along. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you did not like it, leave a dislike. Leave any suggestions or comments you have down below. Subscribe and share this video if you want to see more like it in the future. That is all for now. Keep on learning. Take care.